Did you know that the Mahakumbh Mela happens once in 12 years? Did you know that Harvard University conducted a multidisciplinary research at the last Mahakumbh Mela 12 years ago? Did you know that this year's Mahakumbh Mela, the authorities are using underwater drones to monitor the situation? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. Last week, on the first day of the Mahakumbh Mela, an estimated 1.5 crore devotees took a holy dip in the Sangam. By the time the Mahakumbh Mela winds down in about 45 days, an estimated 40 to 50 crore devotees would have been hosted in Prayagraj. This is more than the population of most countries. Further, these devotees are housed in temporary tents erected on the mud banks of the river, which is exposed once the floodwaters recede. The geographical area of this temporary city is about approximately 40 square kilometers. To give you a sense of proportion, this is half the city of Prayagraj. In other words, Prayagraj grows by an extra half during these 2 months of the Mahakumbh Mela. Most scholars are blown away by the ability of India to host a congregation of this scale so smoothly. Several of them even argue that the Mahakumbh Mela holds valuable lessons to the world, especially in urbanism, in an era of unprecedented uncertainties and conflicts, where permanence is a luxury. To unpack this thought, I spoke to Rahul Mehrotra. He's an architect and the head of urban planning and design at Harvard University, and also a scholar who's deeply researched the Kumbh Mela. But before that, here is a brief explainer on the phenomenon of the Mahakumbh Mela.
The 45-day Mahakumbh Mela was off to an auspicious start last week, with 1.5 crore people taking the holy dip in the Sangam on the first day. The Sangam is the point of confluence of the three rivers Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati. Spread out over 40 square kilometers, this temporary city of tents comes up on the mud bank that is exposed once the floodwaters of the river recede in November. For long, the event has drawn the interests of scholars from all over the world. In 2013, Harvard University undertook a multidisciplinary research on the Mahakumbh Mela. This year, the state government has pulled out the stops. It includes the setting up of an elaborate infrastructure to ensure the smooth functioning of this mammoth event. This includes setting up temporary bridges, roads, sanitation facilities, and medical camps. The administration has also deployed a vast number of security personnel to manage the crowd and ensure safety. The security arrangements include AI-powered crowd density monitoring with over 340 experts at key locations, thousands of CCTV cameras and drones for aerial surveillance, facial recognition technology at entry points for enhanced safety. For the first time, the authorities are deploying underwater drones capable of diving up to 100 meters to provide round-the-clock surveillance at the Sangam area. It is expected that over the next 1 month, the Mahakumbh Mela will witness 40 to 50 crore footfalls.
I began by asking Rahul on his first thoughts about the phenomenon of the Mahakumbh Mela, especially since he was present at the last Mahakumbh Mela at Prayagraj 12 years ago, as a scholar leading a team of researchers from Harvard University.
As you know, I've written about it, and the title of my book is Mapping the Ephemeral Megacity. I'm interested as an academic, really, in the idea of the ephemeral, because I believe that in many parts of the world, and especially in our culture in India, the ephemeral and the spectacles that are ephemeral are perhaps as important as the spectacles that are architectural, right? So, I mean, a large temple is a spectacle, but it's about permanence. It's about trying to signal a permanent being. Whereas these ephemeral events sometimes are much more powerful, but they're ephemeral, they leave no memory. And I think the Kumbh is one such spectacle. Now, it can be seen as a spectacle of congregation, that is the numbers you talk about. You can see it as a spectacle of religious gathering on a much more serious note. It's profoundly spiritual and powerful. So these are spectacles where people come together, and the Kumbh happens to be ephemeral. Now, having said that, just from my own research experience and whatever insight I might have gained from that, I think the 400 million figure is a gross exaggeration. I think it's closer to about 120 million.
In fact, I want to go back to this research project which you co-led from Harvard University. It's 12 years on. So, what are the kind of enduring takeaways when you look back?
That's a very good question. Like I said, that was the first cell phone Kumbh Mela. And I think at that moment, whether it was security, whether it was management, the officials began to see the potential of the digital, which has been taken, from what I'm gathering from the news, to another level this time in terms of managing it, drones underwater, drones in the air, and all of that. But for me, the couple of really important takeaways, and I'm now using the lens of an architect and an urbanist, were two or threefold. One was the fact that the Kumbh Mela is laid out in a very systematic way on a grid that straddles the river. Every road in the grid goes across as a pontoon bridge, which means it's an incredibly robust system, right? So if the river sways because there's an unseasonal rain or the dam has to be opened to flush the water, it doesn't disturb the integrity of the city, the ephemeral megacity, right? I mean, compare it to Manhattan or Calcutta or any other city that's going across the river with one or two bridges. You always have bottlenecks, right? But this is a free flowing, very efficient grid. And I think that is a very important learning. So there's no mega bridge, which is a monument, but each one is a efficient pontoon bridge. But it creates and embodies the fabric of the city with incredible efficiency. That was a wonderful learning for me, just for planning cities generally, right? How you circulate, how you move across the river, how do you create a stability. The second incredible learning, and this was one of those eureka moments, was that everything above the ground in the Kumbh Mela is made out of about five materials. It's made out of 8 foot tall bamboo, string, rope, or wire, screws or nails, and then skinning material. It could be tarpaulin, it could be beautiful textile, it could be corrugated metal sheets, etc. So, in a sense, because it's a kit of parts, there are five materials that aggregate all the way from a small tent for four people to large temples. And if you look at them carefully, it's only these five materials, generically five materials, which is what allows it to be assembled and disassembled so quickly. It's a kit of parts. But what is wonderful is when you walk there, you see such diversity and variation that it looks like a real city, because in reality, it has all the attributes of any city. It has sanitation, water supply, sweepers, you name it, hospitals. It has every governance system, security systems. It has all the attributes of any real urban system. But it's made out of just these very few materials, which allow them to be assembled and disassembled incredibly quickly. And as I say, half in jest, but on a tone of seriousness, it is the cleanest Indian city I've ever lived in.
I also want to, stick to this ephemeral city idea which you are posing. It's very interesting that it's a impermanent structure, yet it is able to deliver all the facilities that a permanent structure gives to us in any city. So, which again, I want to go back to the question that what is a big leap from ensuring that the same facilities can also be given in a permanent structure like a city?
I think so. After I studied the Kumbh Mela, within my academic circles at least, the question I was asked was, Chalo, you've studied a religious city. I argued it has a single purpose. But what does that mean more theoretically for cities, which is another way of framing your question? And then we embarked on a research project which was called Ephemeral Urbanism, and the subtitle of that was Does Permanence Matter? And we studied a whole range of what we might call as ephemeral landscapes. Ephemeral landscapes of transactions, which are markets, ephemeral landscapes of contestation, of refuge, which are refugee camps, of disasters, which are places that are built after a tsunami or an earthquake, military camps. We looked at mining towns because mining towns also have an expiration date. When the copper gets over in Chile in a town, the town disappears, it gets dismantled. Now, each of these settlements have expiration dates, but they work with different forms of contestation. But I think what I learned from this theoretical exploration, it's not a matter of permanent versus temporary. I think for the future, to make our planet sustainable, we have to calibrate our decisions about what should be permanent and what should be temporary. So, my question would be, are we often making permanent solutions for temporary problems, right? So I would argue that in any city, we should not attribute all the land to particular uses. We should keep 40% of the land, 30% of the land in a city where the government decides every year what the use is going to be. So some year it's given to a school, the school builds tents, so they build mud structures. They have the school till they get a permanent structure once they know they're going to be there for longer, right? We often, so in America, for example, currently there are over 2,000 shopping malls that have been abandoned, huge structures that have been abandoned. If you think of the Olympic Games, every time they spend billions of dollars and no one uses those stadiums because there's no capacity to use it. The Olympics should be pneumatic structures that are dismantled and they travel with the Olympic company, with the Olympic committee, right? So the question is, I think we need permanence as human beings. We aspire for permanence, but we should lock all our resources into permanent solutions, buildings, where sometimes we are making mistakes. So I think we have to use the idea of the ephemeral, the idea of temporality, the idea of lighter structures more instrumentally so that we can be more strategic in the way we make human settlements.
I'm
Yes.
curious, how does this intersect with the circumstance that the world finds itself today? We are facing geopolitical conflicts, very violent ones. So, you have end result a lot of refugee camps coming up. You have climate change. Countries are likely to be submerged. So, this whole issue of ephemeral cities, the lessons we draw from the Kumbh Mela, how do they fit in with this contemporary world that we are in?
Anil, incredibly well. For me, I can't believe how deeply it resonates. Let me describe the world in a state of flux. The flux is both the movement of demographies because of contestation, and the flux is also because nature is in flux, climate change, right? So we are going to be, as a humanity, as human beings, absolutely in flux for the next many, many decades, if not longer. And I think the lessons we can learn from ephemerality help us think in terms of how we can design transitions. See, as human beings, because of our obsession with permanence, we are very married by instinct to looking at absolute solutions. What is the final solution? And then you build it out without thinking that sometimes you have to think of transitions, which means, say, for climate change, we are buffering the shore. Manhattan is spending billions of dollars creating retaining walls to save all that real estate, right? What is, of course, the logical thing to do if we think in temporal scales is managed retreat. Retreat. How do we retreat to higher grounds? How do we change where we live, etc.? Now, that can't happen through absolute solutions. We will have to try things.
But the Kumbh Mela itself, which you have written about at length, is the very nature of the land is very fluid because it's post monsoons. So it's not something that will be there forever. After this, then the next round of monsoons come, it's washed away and submerged. And they have to reinvent. So, which is what you're saying makes eminent sense. It, in a way, it mirrors the world that we live in, where climate change can disrupt your entire weather system, extreme weather instances have shot up, including in India. So that's a great lesson, right, on how
Oh,
sustainable.
absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely, because the river banks and the shape of the Kumbh site is different every time. That's why the grid, how you have the bridges going through, many of these lessons are immensely important. And again, I must underscore my argument is not that we must make all permanent cities, but we should make permanence where we are sure that permanence is the right answer.
Finally, Rahul, this you have described the Kumbh Mela as a kinetic city, which signals the idea of grand adjustments. We have covered it in fair detail here in our conversation, but can you just elaborate for us what you mean by this?
I started writing about cities and I was looking at Mumbai, and the only word I could use to describe it was a kinetic city because it was always in motion. I went to the cricket Maidans to watch cricket. I would drive by in the evening and the cricketers were gone. There was a wedding happening there in a Shamiana. I went back in the morning, the Shamiana was gone and there was cricket happening. I walked down some street, there was a bazaar. I went back the next day, there was no bazaar. It was a city in motion, which is what introduced me to the idea of ephemerality, that we have to take seriously the flux of time and how people. And so the attributes that I give the kinetic city as a rubric or as a framework is it's a city which is elastic, that it allows unimagined uses of spaces and stretches spaces to use. Your example of the school and the cyber cafe, it is an expansion of the use to unimagined kind of things, right? The other attribute I give it is reversibility, that it reverses its form. And the third one is about it's about colonizing and decolonizing. Someone colonizes a space, but you can also decolonize it. And then the last attribute I give it is what I call the attribute of soft thresholds, which is that in many cities thresholds are very harsh. A rich man's house has a hard door, you can't go through it. In the kinetic city, the rich, the poor all commingle in space because temporality softens how those interactions happen. So the riches go and buy the vegetables, they are getting marriages on the Maidan, they are in the view of the public. It is actually a wonderful social mix also because of the temporality. You don't fix things in space and time, but you leave fluidity in space and time. And I think it is very important for social resolution. The moment we separate the rich and poor in very harsh ways in space, which like we are beginning to do in our cities in these high-rise buildings and things, then you don't get the kind of social resolution that you get when a city is in motion with all these things intermingling. And I think that's a quality Indian cities mustn't lose. It makes them unique anywhere in the world. And that's why Bombay was the laboratory from where I could actually be inspired to think about the kinetic city, but also the notion of ephemerality as it extends into urbanism and thinking theoretically about cities.
Fascinating. So it's actually very interesting that the Kumbh Mela is holds out. I mean, it's a powerful display of faith of a community. At the same time, it is also holds such valuable lessons on contemporary urbanism and the ways cities should evolve. Particularly in a country like India, we are
Yeah.
so densely populated. So the idea of binaries is very you know kind of out of sync with the way India has evolved over centuries.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Very much. That's very well put, Anil. And I think that's what really kind of inspired me to actually even carry out these studies because I found that binaries and the way we situate them is a very nice way to organize the world around us. No, it makes us understand things, public, private, this, that, and the other. But really, finally, we have to, as communities and societies, find a way that we live together. And in order to do that, we have to dissolve binaries. And I was very inspired by the fact observing cities in India, how they worked. And I found that what we were teaching about cities were very Western in their model. There was no theoretical framework for cities in Asia. And theory must come out from where the action is. And so that's how I began to theorize this in a way that students or other professionals could think about design in these cities in kind of very, very different, ways of imagining it, and not just thinking only through architecture, because our cities and our existence as societies, there are many other spectacles through which we celebrate our community. It need not only be architecture.
Undoubtedly, the spiritual spectacle of the Mahakumbh Mela has no parallels. The show of faith of millions of devotees is humbling. At the same time, as Rahul points out, there are vital lessons in urbanism for the rest of the world to absorb. The inherent flexibility in both the construction and governance of this temporary city are vital values for the world to imbibe to pursue urbanism in an era racked by unprecedented uncertainties and conflicts. A world in which permanence is a luxury. In other words, a perfect sangam of spirituality and urbanism. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please to share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.